For more than 20 years, no one had managed to move him from his place. He was the man everyone feared facing, the guardian of the lineage, the first to test anyone who approached the ancient masters. When he heard that Bruce Lee was in the city, he decided to challenge him in front of everyone. He was convinced that in 3 seconds he would prove who the real master was. But what happened was not a victory or a defeat like the others. In less than a second, he ended up on the ground without having received a single blow. And in that moment, surrounded by the silence of his own students, he understood a truth that would change his teaching forever. Being correct is not the same as being effective. Have you ever been absolutely sure you were right about something, only to be proven wrong in the most unexpected way? That feeling of certainty turning into confusion in a single instant, that is exactly what this story is about. Guangzhou, 1968. The Cultural Revolution had been shaking China for 2 years with relentless force. Temples were being dismantled stone by stone. Martial arts schools were being labeled as symbols of feudalism and the old world. Masters were hiding, scattering, or simply vanishing. But there are traditions that do not die out. They only change shape, pull back, and adapt. In the hills north of the city, a quiet network of former Shaolin monks continued operating in secret. They gathered in damp basements, in courtyards hidden behind locked gates. They trained in silence, away from prying eyes, protecting the few elders who still carried ancient knowledge. That knowledge was not found in books or manuals. It lived in the body and in memory. Among them stood out a figure the students simply called Lao Si, meaning teacher. He was 52 years old. He had entered the Shaolin temple as a young child in the 1920s. His body had been shaped by 2 decades of relentless repetition, holding the horse stance until his legs stopped shaking, striking wooden posts until his knuckles stopped bleeding, repeating movements thousands of times until pain became routine and routine became nature. By 1968, he had spent 20 years performing the role that some described with a single word, enforcer. His function was clear and straightforward. If someone came looking for the temple elders or tried to challenge the lineage, Lao Si was the one who faced them first. A single exchange, a brief moment, a definitive test. If the visitor remained standing with their structure intact, they were allowed to speak. If not, they left. Until that point, no one had passed that test. That summer, a persistent rumor began to circulate. Bruce Lee was in Hong Kong, and there was a possibility he would travel to Guangzhou to meet with a translator and a screenwriter. For many traditional masters, Lee was not a true martial artist. In their opinion, he was a showman. He had left Hong Kong, moved to the United States, taught non-Chinese students, and appeared on television. That, they said, was not martial arts. That was marketing. But Lao Si did not entirely share that view. He saw in that rumor an opportunity. He firmly believed that Hollywood, no matter how skilled and polished it appeared, could not match the discipline born from decades inside a system that slowly erases the ego until nothing remains but technique. He began asking quiet, persistent, precise questions. Within 3 days, he already knew the address, the date, and the time of the meeting. He then made a single request, brief and firm. "Let me be there." The translator hesitated. He understood the risk. He finally agreed, but set one clear condition. No aggression, no public spectacle, no dishonor. Lao Si accepted without argument. The morning of the meeting arrived sooner than expected. The courtyard was small and rectangular, surrounded by walls on 3 sides. The air carried a silent tension. By the time Bruce Lee was about to arrive, around 20 people had already gathered. No one spoke much. No one moved without reason. Lao Si remained near the center, hands behind his back, breathing calmly, as if time held no urgency. Then shortly after noon, the gate opened. Bruce Lee stepped through carrying a small canvas bag. He was 30 years old, lean and compact. His movements were efficient, without waste, without hesitation. The translator Chen greeted the small group and apologized for the informal setting. He explained they were there to discuss screenwriting ideas and philosophy, nothing more. Lee did not respond. He set the bag on the ground and stood still, weight centered, hands relaxed at his sides, watching in silence, as if listening to something the others could not hear. Chen pointed to Lao Si and introduced him simply, almost neutrally, as a master who had studied for many years. Lao Si stepped forward. He did not bow. He did not smile. He looked Li directly in the eyes and spoke in Cantonese with a steady, contained voice. I have heard many things about you. I would like to know if they are true. Chen translated each word precisely. Bruce Lee's face remained calm, unreadable, as if the scene were not a challenge, but simply another conversation. His eyes showed no tension, no pride, only complete attention. What would you like to know? He asked quietly. Lao Si did not hesitate. I would like to test you. The courtyard went silent, a dense, expectant silence, as if the air itself had paused to listen. Chen immediately began to apologize, attempting to ease the situation, but Li raised one hand with a gentle gesture that was enough to stop him. Then he looked at Lao Si for a long moment, reading not only his words but his intention. Is this to learn or to prove something? The question hung in the air, heavy with meaning. It was not a provocation. It was an invitation to honesty. Lao Si considered it. He did not answer immediately, and when he spoke, it was with a sincerity uncommon in a challenge. Both. Li nodded slowly, the way someone acknowledges a truthful answer. All right. Chen tried to step in again. He suggested another time, a more formal setting, more controlled conditions. But Li shook his head with the same calm he had shown since his arrival. It is fine, he repeated. I will respond. He then took 3 steps toward the center of the courtyard. They were not theatrical steps. They were precise, measured. The crowd reacted instinctively, shifting to form a wide circle around the 2 men. No one gave orders. No one suggested it. It simply happened, as if everyone understood they were about to witness something significant. Li stopped roughly 2.5 meters from Lao Si. He did not take a rigid guard. His feet were shoulder-width apart, knees slightly bent, hands low and open. He looked relaxed but not careless. Lao Si observed carefully. He immediately recognized that this stance did not belong to any traditional system. It was not Wing Chun, it was not boxing, it was not classical kung fu. It was something in between, something adaptable, something that did not commit to a fixed form. And that made him uncomfortable, because a clear structure can be studied, anticipated, broken, but something that shifts is difficult to control. He moved 1 step forward, closing the distance. His presence grew more dominant. Then he spoke loudly enough for everyone present to hear clearly. I will tell you what is going to happen. You will be on the ground in 3 seconds, maybe less. If you want to stop now, I will respect that. But if we continue, I will not hold back. Bruce Lee did not respond with words. He only adjusted his posture slightly, a minimal shift of weight, almost imperceptible. Lao Si interpreted that gesture as a silent refusal. He saw a man who refused to commit to a defined defensive structure, and that absence of fixed form began to irritate him. He decided to end the encounter immediately. A straight strike, full speed, full commitment. Centerline against centerline. He breathed in deeply, settled his weight into his rear leg. His right hand prepared. His eyes locked onto Lei's sternum, the point where he intended to finish the exchange. Bruce Lee did not move. His attention was not on the hand or the face. He was reading the shoulders, the hips, the places where movement truly begins. The courtyard held its breath, and then Lao Si exploded forward. The movement was fast, decisive, trained across decades, but Li shifted just 10 centimeters to the left. It was not a jump. It was not a retreat. It was a small, precise lateral adjustment, just enough for the fist to pass through empty space where his chest had been a fraction of a second before. In that same moment, Li's rear hand rose and found the wrist from the inside, redirecting it further outward. It was not a violent pull. It was not force against force. It was guidance, direction, control of space. At the same time, Li moved forward. His front foot slid diagonally outward past Lao Si's lead leg. His left hand, open with fingers together, rose with precision and stopped just in front of the monk's throat without making contact, only occupying the space. Lao Si felt it immediately. His strike had landed in emptiness. His weight was committed forward. His base had become unstable. He tried to step back to reset his position, but Li's hand still held the angle of his wrist, and the geometry was wrong. Every attempt to recover his balance seemed delayed by a fraction of a second, and in a real exchange, a fraction of a second is an eternity. As he began shifting his weight backward, Li's leg performed a small sweeping motion with his heel, quietly removing Lao Si's rear foot. It was not a powerful kick. It was not a dramatic gesture. The monk's weight was already traveling backward. The sweep simply removed the support. The rear leg gave way, the hips dropped, and in that instant, every person present understood something none of them would ever forget. 1 second, maybe 1.5, nothing more. Bruce Lee stepped back, reclaiming the space with the same calm with which he had occupied it. His hands returned to neutral position. His breathing remained steady. There was no tension in his face, no trace of effort. He looked like someone who had just completed an ordinary exercise. Lao Si remained seated on the ground, resting on one hand. He was not injured. He had not been struck. There had been no blow. He had simply been placed on the ground. The courtyard was completely still. No one shouted, no one applauded, no one moved. Everything had happened with such speed and precision that many of those watching were unsure they had fully understood what they had just seen. They knew something decisive had occurred, but they could not describe exactly how. Lao Si lowered his gaze to the ground. He had been neutralized completely, without violence, without spectacle, without visible effort, not defeated by force, neutralized by understanding. Then Bruce Lee extended his hand. The gesture was simple, direct, human. Lao Si hesitated for a moment, surprised more by the intention than by the outcome. Then he took it. Lee helped him to his feet with a single smooth motion, no pulling, no display of dominance, as if both men had shared the same lesson. Once standing, Lao Si spoke quietly, almost to himself. "You did not strike me." Lee nodded calmly. "I could have." Lee nodded again. Lao Si looked at him carefully, trying to understand not just the technique but the decision that had accompanied it. "Why did you not?" "Because you did not want to hurt me. You wanted to test me, so I tested you." Lao Si stood in silence, absorbing those words. He understood then something fundamental. Bruce Lee had read his intention before the exchange had even begun. He had recognized the curiosity behind the challenge. The decision not to strike had not been mercy, it had been respect. Lao Si inclined his head in a brief but sincere bow. It was not a ceremonial gesture, it was an acknowledgement. Lee responded immediately, returning the bow at the same angle, with the same precision, as if matching not only the gesture but the dignity of the man before him. And then something no one had expected happened. Bruce Lee knelt down. He placed himself on one knee in the same spot where Lao Si had fallen. Then he looked up and gestured gently for him to join. There was no hurry in his movement, no pride in his posture, only the intention to share. He began to speak in fragments of Cantonese, mixing words with clear and deliberate gestures. Lee was showing him something. He placed his hand at the exact point where the strike had begun. He slowly traced the trajectory through the air. He indicated the precise moment of the interception. He demonstrated how the angle had redirected the force. He moved slowly, patiently, with genuine respect for the process. He repeated the movement once, then a second time, then a third. Then he paused and invited Lao Si to try it himself. The monk followed each detail carefully, and so they remained for several minutes, two men kneeling in the dirt, not competing, not arguing, not demonstrating superiority, working together through the mechanics of what had just occurred. For those watching from the circle, it no longer looked like a confrontation. It had become a lesson, a quiet conversation between two traditions that until that moment had regarded each other with suspicion. Finally, Bruce Lee stood up, helped Lao Si to his feet once more, picked up his small canvas bag, and walked toward the gate with the same composure with which he had entered. Before crossing the threshold, he stopped, turned his head slightly, looked back, and then he was gone. The gate closed slowly. The courtyard returned to silence, but it was no longer the same silence as before. The men who remained were not trying to understand the technique. They were trying to understand the exchange. The fact that a man many had dismissed as a Hollywood figure had just treated a traditional monk with more genuine respect than many masters showed their own students. And from that day forward, Lao Si's teaching changed permanently. His students noticed small differences first. Training sessions became shorter but more precise. Movements were no longer repeated out of habit, but examined for purpose. Forms were no longer practiced only to preserve tradition, but to understand their actual function. Lao Tzu began asking questions he had never asked before, questions that were uncomfortable, questions that were necessary. What is this movement actually for? At what moment would it work? What happens when the opponent does not cooperate? Some students resisted, others grew confused, but the most attentive ones understood that something deep had shifted. It was not about abandoning tradition, it was about restoring its meaning. Because that encounter in the courtyard had not been a defeat, it had been a revelation, a simple, direct revelation, impossible to ignore. Being correct is not the same as being effective. And here is the part that most people never think about. How many times have you held onto a method, a belief, or a way of doing things simply because you have always done it that way? How many times has the discomfort of being challenged made you dig in harder instead of opening up? The real threat is not the person who challenges you. The real threat is the version of yourself that refuses to learn when it matters most. If this story made you reflect, remember this. True strength is not found in proving you are right. It is found in being willing to learn something new when life challenges you. Subscribe to the channel and turn on the notification bell, because here we do not just tell stories of combat. We tell stories that transform the mind, the character, and the way you see the world.